A ɓrʒx is an Iron Age drystone hollow-walled structure of a type found only in Scotland. Brochs belong to the classification complex Atlantic Roundhouse, devised by Scottish archaeologists in the 1980s. Their origin is a matter of some controversy. The theory that they were defensive military structures is not accepted by many modern archaeologists, while the alternative notion that they were farmhouses is dismissed by some others. Although most stand alone in the landscape, some examples exist of ɓrʒxs surrounded by clusters of smaller dwellings. Origin and definition. The word broch is derived from Lowland Scots broch, meaning fort. In the mid-19th century, Scottish antiquaries called ɓrʒxs ഃbrɒx, after Old Norse borg, with the same meaning. Brochs are often referred to as duns in the West. Antiquaries began to use the spelling broch in the 1870s. A precise definition for the word has proved elusive. Brochs are the most spectacular of a complex class of roundhouse buildings found throughout Atlantic Scotland. The Shetland Amenity Trust lists about 120 sites in Shetland as candidate ɓrʒxs, while the Royal Commission on the Ancient and Historical Monuments of Scotland identifies a total of 571 candidate ɓrʒx sites throughout the country. Researcher Ewan Mackey has proposed a much smaller total for Scotland of 104. The origin of ɓrʒxs is a subject of continuing research. 60 years ago, most archaeologists believed that ɓrʒxs, usually regarded as the castles of Iron Age chieftains, were built by immigrants who had been pushed northward after being displaced first by the intrusions of Belgic tribes into what is now southeast England at the end of the 2nd century BC, and later by the Roman invasion of southern Britain beginning in AD 43. Yet there is now little doubt that the hollow-walled ɓrʒx tower was purely an invention from what is now Scotland. Even the kinds of pottery found inside him that most resembled South British styles were local hybrid forms. The first of the modern review articles on this subject did not, as is commonly believed, propose that ɓrʒxs were built by immigrants, but rather that a hybrid culture formed from the blending of a small number of immigrants with the native population of the Hebrides produced him in the 1st century BC, basing him on earlier, simpler, promontory forts. This view contrasted, for example, with that of Sir Lindsay Scott, who argued, following Child, for a wholesale migration into Atlantic Scotland of people from southwest England. Mackey's theory has fallen from favour too, mainly because starting in the 1970s there was a general move in archaeology away from diffusionist explanations towards those pointing to exclusively indigenous development. Meanwhile, the increasing number, albeit still pitifully few, of radiocarbon dates for the primary use of ɓrʒxs still suggests that most of the towers were built in the 1st centuries BC and AD. A few may be earlier, notably the one proposed for Old Scatness-Broch in Shetland, where a sheep bone dating to 390–200 BC has been reported. The other ɓrʒx claimed to be substantially older than the 1st century BC is Crossgurk in Caithness, but a recent review of the evidence suggests that it cannot plausibly be assigned a date earlier than the 1st centuries BC, AD distribution. The distribution of ɓrʒxs is centred on northern Scotland. Caithness, Sutherland and the Northern Isles have the densest concentrations, but there are also a great many examples in the west of Scotland and the Hebrides. Although mainly concentrated in the Northern Highlands and the islands, a few examples occur in the borders, on the west coast of Dumfries and Galloway, and near Stirling. In AC 1560 sketch there appears to be a ɓrʒx by the river next to Annan Castle in Dumfries and Galloway. This small group of southern ɓrʒxs has never been satisfactorily explained. Purposes. The original interpretation of ɓrʒxs, favoured by 19th-century antiquarians, was that they were defensive structures, places of refuge for the community and their livestock. They were sometimes regarded as the work of Danes or Picts. From the 1930s to the 1960s, archaeologists like V. Gordon Childe and later John Hamilton regarded them as castles where local landowners held sway over a subject population. The castle theory fell from favour among Scottish archaeologists in the 1980s, due to a lack of supporting archaeological evidence. These archaeologists suggested that defensibility was never a major concern in the siting of the ʻbrôch, and argued that they may have been the stately homes of their time, objects of prestige and very visible demonstrations of superiority for important families. Once again, however, there is a lack of archaeological proof for this reconstruction, and the sheer number of ʻbrôchs, sometimes in places with a lack of good land, makes it problematic. ʻbrôchs' close groupings and profusion in many areas may indeed suggest that they had a primarily defensive or even offensive function. Some of them were sited beside precipitous cliffs and were protected by large ramparts, artificial or natural. A good example is at Burland near ʻbrɒ�x in Shetland, on a cliff top and cut off from the mainland by huge ditches. Often they are at key strategic points. In Shetland they sometimes cluster on each side of narrow stretches of water. The ʻbrôch of Musa, for instance, is directly opposite another at Burland in Sandwich. In Orkney there are more than a dozen on the facing shores of Enallow Sound, and many at the exits and entrances of the great harbour of Scapa Flow. In Sutherland quite a few are placed along the sides and at the mouths of deep valleys. Writing in 1956, John Stewart suggested that ʻbrôchs were forts put up by a military society to scan and protect the countryside and seas. Finally, some archaeologists consider ʻbrôch sites individually, doubting that there ever was a single common purpose for which every ʻbrôch was constructed. There are differences between the various areas in which ʻbrôchs are found, with regard to position, dimensions and likely status. For example, the ʻbrôch villages which occur at a few places in Orkney have no parallel in the Western Isles. Structures. Generally, ʻbrôchs have a single entrance with bar holes, door checks and lintels. There are mural cells and there is escarcement for timber-framed lean-to dwellings lining the inner face of the wall. Also there is a spiral staircase winding upwards between the inner and outer wall and connecting the galleries. ʻbrôchs vary from 5 to 15 meters in internal diameter, with 3-meter thick walls. On average, the walls only survived to a few meters in height. There are 5 extant examples of towers with significantly higher walls: Duncarlow Way on Lewis, Duntelve and Duntrodden in Glenelg, Musa in Shetland and Dundornagle in Sutherland, all of whose walls exceed 6.5 meters in height. Musa's walls are the best preserved and are still 13 meters tall. It is not clear how many ʻbrôchs originally stood this high. A frequent characteristic is that the walls are galleried, with an open space between. The outer and inner wall skins are separate but tied together with linking stone slabs. These linking slabs may in some cases have served as steps to higher floors. It is normal for there to be a cell breaking off from the passage beside the door. This is known as the guard cell. It has been found in some Shetland ʻbrôchs that guard cells in entrance passageways are close to large door check stones. Though there was much argument in the past, it is now generally accepted that ʻbrôchs were roofed, probably with a conical timber-framed roof covered with a locally sourced thatch. The evidence for this assertion is still fairly scanty, though excavations at Dunbarabit, Lewis, have supported it. The main difficulty with this interpretation continues to be the potential source of structural timber, though bog and driftwood may have been plentiful sources. On the islands of Orkney and Shetland there are very few cells at ground floor. Most ʻbrôchs have scarcements which would have allowed the construction of a very sturdy wooden first floor, and excavations at Loch Narberry on the Isle of Lewis show signs of a further second floor. Some ʻbrôchs such as Dundornagle and Coleswick in Shetland have unusual triangular lintels above the entrance door. As in the case of Old Scatness in Shetland, ʻbrôchs were sometimes located close to arable land and a source of water. Sometimes, on the other hand, they were sited in wilderness areas. Brochs are often built beside the sea. Sometimes they are on islands in lochs. About 20 Orcadian Broch sites include small settlements of stone buildings surrounding the main tower. Examples include Howe, near Stromness, Gur-Nesbroch in the northwest of mainland, Orkney, Mid-Howe on Rouse and Lingro near Kirkwall. There are Broch village sites in Caithness, but elsewhere they are unknown. Most Brochs are unexcavated. Those that have been properly examined show that they continued in use for many centuries, with the interiors often modified and changed, and that they underwent many phases of habitation and abandonment. The end of the Broch period seems to have come around AD 200 to 300. Heritage status: Musa, Old Scatness and Jalshoff. The Crucible of Iron Age Shetland is a combination of 3 Broch sites in Shetland that are on the United Kingdom tentative list of possible nominations for the UNESCO World Heritage Programme list of sites of outstanding cultural or natural importance to the common heritage of humankind. This list, published in July 2010, includes sites that may be nominated for inscription over the next 5 to 10 years.